Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast. Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 9. This is my first threesome. In other words, I'm talking with two guests, Walter Brogan and Charles Santino. If you're a fan of hippo farts, you are in for a big treat. Walter has been a storyboard artist for a number of years, but he's much better known for his work on Marvel's Crazy magazine and for Cracked magazine. Charles, meanwhile, has written numerous books such as Ayn Rand's Anthem, illustrated by Joe Staton, as well as for Marvel's Conan and What the comics, and the books Running from the Devil, A Memoir of a Boy Possessed, and Louis L'Amour, Law of the Desert Born. Together, Walter and Charles are the artist and writer, respectively, for a new book series featuring Danny and Harry, a cat and seagull pair of private detectives. Their first volume is out with the title Danny and Harry, Private Detectives, The Case of the Missing Trunk. Here they are, Walter Brogan and Charles Santino. All right, we are on the air with Walter Brogan and Charles Santino. How are you both doing today?
Good, very good.
Okay.
I recorded a hippo fart. You want to hear it?
Sure.
All right. Keep talking and I'll find it. I have to find it.
I thought you had it at the ready here. Okay. So,
well,
I'm glad we're starting out on a very high level of sophistication.
Okay. Well, like it or not, I've known Walter for a while.
I know it's here. I'll find it. Don't worry about that.
And this may be the craziest podcast I've done yet, but because it's a three-way, first of all. So, anyway, glad to have you both here. Walter, I know from Cracked Magazine, doing an interview for my book, If You're Cracked, You're Happy. And Charles Santino, I apparently know from various projects, but I've never actually spoken to you before. So why don't I start with you while Walter is looking up some sounds. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing and things like that.
Sure.
Well,
wait a minute. Hold on, Walter. I think he's talking to me.
Charles.
I know.
You can see how well Walter and I work together. And actually, we could have met, late 80s, because we both did work for Larry Hama at Marvel, even on some of the same magazines, Savage Tales Volume 2. But I didn't know him, he didn't know me, we never met, and it took us another 30-plus years to actually get together. I started by submitting material for Savage Tales because it was an anthology, and I figured it's only 4 pages, 8 pages. I could get in, I could get out. It doesn't have to be the best thing ever. It just has to fill a spot. And so I made my first sale to Marvel. And then after that, I did Conan for Marvel for a while, and a short humor piece for What the.
I remember that.
Which was a parody of the Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles, or is it Mutant Ninja Turtles? Those guys. And that was drawn by Keith Wilson. I don't know if you know Keith Wilson's stuff. He did a really fine job with that humor piece. And from there, I worked for some of the other companies. Did a very interesting original graphic novel for DC that was killed along with a whole bunch of other projects when the industry crashed and burned in the early 90s. And so none of that stuff has seen the light of day, including Joe Staton had drawn 100 pages and gotten paid for it for an adaptation of Larry Niven's Ringworld.
Oh, wow.
And I've seen those pages, but they have never been published either.
Huh.
So I kind of left the industry when it crashed and burned in the early 90s, and then came back around 2008. And at that point, most of the so-called legitimate book publishers had graphic novel lines.
Mm-hmm.
And since I had worked in editorial for Dodd, Mead and Company, a regular book publisher in the 80s, I knew that industry. So I decided to take that route, and that's how I got back in. And I've been doing a variety of different things since around 2008, including stuff for Edgar Rice Burroughs, adapting Louis L'Amour. And I had a project that I thought Walter would be perfect for, but he didn't think so. And he introduced me to Danny and Harry and their ensemble, and had a rather lame idea for a story involving them, if I may say so. And I said, let's think about another approach. He liked it, and it was off to the races. And the characters were so inspiring, so bizarre, and so funny that I thought, this is great. I can come up with stuff for these guys. And fortunately, we see eye to eye on most things. Every once in a while, he has to drag me back to reality, or I have to drag him back to reality. But in the end, he likes what I'm doing. I like what he's doing. And it's been working so far.
So you tend to work together nowadays, correct?
Yeah, with the stories are collaborations. We bounce ideas back and forth, and try to come up with something that's going to be interesting to both of us. The real challenge with Walter is that he wants to draw a large ensemble of characters. And so I have to try to figure out how to juggle all these characters and make sure they all get their proper time on the stage and have something to do in the story. So that's a bit of a challenge. And I thought that he might have gotten that out of his system with the first story, but we're working on the second one, and he's got like 10 new characters.
Walter, why are you doing that?
I found the hippo fart. You want to hear it?
Okay. That's a good response.
What do you think?
I've seen the footage where that's from. I know what you're talking about.
Was that wild or what?
It's wild.
Huh?
It always sounds like a bee or something.
When I first saw that, I was totally amazed. I almost fell off the chair.
Well, maybe we can work that into a comic with a scratch and sniff feature.
So what are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about why you draw so many extra characters that Charles has to now write stories for, whereas before he was writing very simply. Now it's very complex.
Because I'm lonely.
You're lonely? Oh, too bad.
Yeah, the first story will end up being 140 pages, just so I can get all those characters that he drew in there.
Wow. Well, okay, explain that to me. I mean, it's like, don't you kind of plan it ahead of time so there's no real need to add characters, or?
Well, initially it was a web comic.
Okay.
So we figured we don't know how long it's going to be. It doesn't matter how long it's going to be. But then when... Shut up.
Walter or his baby is crying, one of the two.
I told him to shut up.
Oh, it must be Walter then.
Anyway,
you'll be the straight man here, Charles. I hope you know.
Yeah, apparently. When we hooked up with Marcosi Publishers, okay, so now it's got to be close-ended. So we figured this looks like it's going to be about 140 pages. There's going to be initially 6 issues that are published as e-comics or electronic or PDFs, and then it'll be collected in print and as an e-book. Each story will be between 22 and 24 pages. The next story sequence we do will be a little better planned in terms of knowing how many pages and the format, so it'll be strictly 24 pages per issue. But there were an awful lot of characters, and there's a pretty big pile-up of all of them at the end of the the story in issue number 6, and some of them survive, some of them don't. Not to give too much away, but we were a little concerned about, well, some of these characters are really good. Why did we kill them? And so instead of some characters that initially were going to get killed are just badly wounded now, they'll be back.
All right. And is this planned to be like just ongoing as long as you can do it, or do you have a set schedule?
We're gonna keep going until somebody reads it.
And I don't remember if you said. Did you say who's publishing it?
Marcosia Enterprises, which they claim to be the largest UK independent comic book publisher.
Okay, I'm not familiar with them, but that's not saying much. They could be the biggest, and I don't know. In a case like that.
they had published a memoir that I adapted for a guy named Steve Kissing out in Cincinnati. He had a very rare form of epilepsy when he was a kid. He had visual and auditory hallucinations. He was convinced he was possessed by the devil.
Wow.
Didn't tell anybody for 5 years because he was afraid that the devil would just get angry with him. And finally, the jig was up when he had a full-blown epileptic seizure in public. But he wrote a memoir about 15 years ago about this and wanted to adapt it to a graphic novel. And that just came out a few months ago from Marcosia. So when we decided to take Danny and Harry to a publisher, naturally I went to Marcosia, and they said yes immediately. So I shut down the webcomic was on Webtoons, which is a pretty big site. So I shut it down there. It was actually starting to get a little bit of an audience over on Webtoons, but these webcomics take a very, very long time ultimately to get to any kind of critical mass. The guys who are making the most money at webcomics have been doing it for anywhere from 5 to 7 years before they can make anything close to a living at it.
Yeah, sounds like doing a podcast.
We don't have that time. We're probably not going to be alive in another 7 years.
So, is this for your retirement, Walter? Or
I thought he was retired.
Oh, okay.
I don't even think of retirement. I gave strict orders as soon as I'm pronounced dead, cremate me and throw my ashes out the window.
So, Walter, what have you done since Cracked? I mean, I know you're working for Disney and other stuff. What have you done in the last 12 years?
Storyboards. Yeah, I've always done that. That's where the money was. There's no Crack. Once I stopped at Crack, I think it was, the last job I did was for Dick Culper.
Oh, yeah. He was the last.
We did something, me and Lou Silverstone, we did something on The Sopranos. Lou actually forced me back in to do that. I didn't want to. I mean, the page rate was ridiculously low. And at that point, I was pretty much burnt out on that type of work. Yeah, I've been doing it for like 20 years, and I just lost interest in it for some reason. I guess the money in advertising was so good that I just said,
right.
Screw this. I grew up. I don't love comics.
Right. Well, I know when we talked last time, you were talking about, it was something that you kind of dashed off in a hurry just to, because it was kind of fun to do. But, it's like your main bread and butter was the advertising or Disney or whatever. Go ahead.
Paul Lakin was running the magazine. I mean, I just took it as the money was gas money, maybe picking up lunch. And it was time for me to experiment with different views, different pen points, different techniques, different style. At that point, but I enjoyed it. I love doing that type of work.
Yeah. Well, I think I've asked this before, but your first work was for Crazy then, over at Marvel.
Yeah, Crazy.
And how did you get in contact with Paul Lakin in the first place?
Louis Sedlin.
Oh, okay.
She was over at Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought some stuff up, and she pulled Paul Reagan over. And I walked out with a 7-page story called Logan's Run.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
Wow. Because, I know you stayed affiliated with him for a while. Didn't you even do his magazine called Wacko and a couple others, too?
Yeah, he was, Paul was amazing in that way. He was always popping up new magazines just out of nowhere. He would just get these magazines, and he would call a bunch of us guys up and said, hey, I got a new magazine.
Because I always wondered about that. I mean, I always say it's kind of interesting how Lakin got all these people, including yourself, being very loyal to him. And it's like no matter where he went, he had like the same crew with him, as it were, doing the art and the writing and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, he would just call us up. He knew us, and he liked working with us. And I was happy I could take my car out now. I had gas money.
Now, did you ever interact with any of the other artists in that group, like Tony Tallarico or Vic Martin or anything like that? It was all just separate and under Paul Lakin's umbrella, as it were?
Not Don. What was his name?
Well, I said Vic Martin. Vic Martin is the one I said. Or Martin.
Martin.
Yeah.
Vic Martin.
Vic. V-I-C. Vic.
He was a little guy, right? He was Argentine.
Yeah.
I met him when I was probably 15. I was taking karate classes with another friend of mine. And the guy who was running the karate class was an Argentine guy. And, his nose was all over his face, and he was like a black belt, 9th degree. And he was showing me all these little cartoons that this guy, Dick Martin, that was his name, Dick Martin?
It was Vic, V-I-C, like Victor.
Oh, Vic, that's right, that's right, Vic.
Dick Martin was on laughing.
That's right. I just didn't like it along with it. You want to say Dick Martin? All right, I'll go along.
And there's Dean Martin and Don Martin and, okay.
Don Martin. It was Tony Martin.
Tony Martin, that's true.
Remember him, the singer, the crooner?
Yeah.
Married Sid Cerise. He was married to Alice Faye. Where was I? Oh, Vic Martin. So he showed me all these little girly cartoons that Vic Martin did. And I got to meet him. He come down to the karate place, and I got to meet him. And
did you meet him again? Did you go to the infamous Cracked 30th anniversary party at that one year?
Yeah. I met him again. He said, "Wow, you got big."
Big in height or big in weight, or both?
Yeah, I grew. I was like 15, and the next time we met was like 20
Oh, he said that. I thought you said that about him.
Yeah, he said, "Wow, you got big," and he said, "How you made it to the big time?" And I'm looking at him and said, "Big time? What are you talking about?" I thought maybe he meant my advertising work, but anyway.
So, speaking of the advertising work, is there anything in the advertising world that we might know that was like a campaign that you're proud of or anything like that?
No, I did the storyboards or the animatics.
Okay. But was there anything for any campaigns like a Coca-Cola or something like that? Or?
You name it, I probably did it.
Oh, okay.
I've been doing it since 1978, and you name it, I've done it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I must have done storyboards, millions of storyboard frames.
So, did you do it for any one agency, or did you do it for any agent? Is it just like?
No, I had 3 reps.
Okay.
Reps, they're like agents. They rep you. They find work. They take 25%. And I had one in New York, one in Chicago, and one in L.A.
And that was how I originally spotted Walter on one of these sites that had the work of storyboard artists, because the project that I was interested in using him for, I had originally an artist who was a storyboard artist, had done some comics for me, and then he wasn't available anymore, and I thought, well, that works, so let me find another storyboard artist. And I found Walter, and that's when he showed me Danny and Harry. But these storyboard artists, although storyboards are somewhat sort of related to comics, not really, because some of these guys cannot make the transition at all. Some of these advertising guys, I used one a long time ago that everything he drew was a montage. So it wasn't panel-to-panel continuity. Every page was like a poster for a movie instead of panel-to-panel storytelling. So he just couldn't get the hang of it. But Walter very, very well understands the way comics work. And if you take a look at Danny and Harry, you see some really strong visual storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark, have you seen anything on Danny and Harry? Are you familiar with it?
To be honest, all I've really seen is the cover and a few panels, because I was just doing a little brief research, and I go, Walter's doing something else. So it's like, it's just kind of interesting how it came about, but I'll have to check it out, to be honest. I hate to be so ignorant about what you're currently working on, but hey, it's like...
Yeah, it's on, you probably
it's just
saw it
between us three guys. Nobody has to know. It's just between us. This is a podcast. Oh, shit, everybody's going to know it now.
Yeah, the book's on Comixology right now, so that's probably where you saw the 3 pages on the cover.
Yeah.
Tell them to go to DannyandHarry.com. That'll take you to a site where you could probably see more work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I think jumps to the that jumps to the Facebook page, and what you'll see on the Facebook page are the posts that I did when we were doing the weekly webcomic, and then I kind of went silent for a while, and then when the comic itself came out, I started it back up again. So there's quite a few panels on the Facebook page from the first 27 or so pages, because that's how far we got with the webcomic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, Mark, we could send you the whole first issue. I mean, for a price. The whole first.
Yeah, I don't mind ordering it. That's not a problem.
Oh, okay.
You'll double our sales.
Yay! Maybe we'll double the listeners.
I think you'll enjoy it. It's it's like old school, old movies. Late 40s film noir. They're private detectives, and I think we captured the mood. Don't you think so, Charles?
Yeah, it has a little bit of a Warner Brothers cartoon feel, but not as over the top in terms of the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I mean, if a bomb goes off in somebody's face in our world, he's dead. Unlike in a Warner Brothers cartoon, but it has some of that sensibility to it, and certainly the style of drawing is very, very cartoony. These are cartoon animals. I know that Walter and I are both enamored of the UPA cartoons.
Yeah. Well,
I'd say it's sort of like a little bit UPA, a little bit Warner.
So.
But but then again, I think it's a little more realistic, even though we're using cartoon characters. It is a little more realistic as far as the settings, as far as dark, gloomy streets.
It's set in the real world. It's definitely set in the real world, except that everybody is a funny animal.
Okay.
But other than that, there's cars, there's buildings, there's plumbing. It's the real world.
With dark shadows all over. It's at night, dark shadows, dark alleys, warehouses.
Now, what's the overall tone? What's the overall tone of it? Is it like humorous, or is it more serious with occasional bits of humor, or how does that?
It's probably 70% serious and 30% humor.
That's about right. My original idea was to play it completely straight, so you'd see these funny animals, but it would be completely straight. But the pictures just forced me to do some funny stuff, and I just I decided I couldn't be that doctrinaire about my original idea of just playing it 100% straight. But you do get caught up. I think you get caught up in the story, and you really feel you forget you're looking at funny animals because the situations, the characterizations, I think come off as very real, and I try to maintain consistency with the characters so that after a while you know what the character is about and what the character will do and won't do and what the character's motivations are and what the conflicts are. So we treat plotting and characterization and dialogue very, very seriously. But again, you're looking at these wacky animals.
So if somebody is not a big fan of animals, let's say if they're just like typical comic book fans, like superheroes and that type of stuff, will they enjoy this, or will it be kind of, oh crap, this is really weird, I don't like this at all?
It depends on how open their mind is, but Walter and I have talked an awful lot about this, and we've decided that our audience is definitely not going to be the typical superhero fan. It's going to be people who are fans of Warner Brothers cartoons, fans of film noir and crime novels and that whole post-war genre of mysteries, and even these people who are into anthropomorphic furries. You know, that's probably going to be part of the audience too. I worked with Joe Staten on something, and he told me he had, when he was working on Scooby-Doo, he got invited to Anthrocon.
Yeah.
And he said it was the strangest thing he had ever been to in his life.
Yeah.
So I think that we're probably going to have to dip our toe in that world at some point. But wherever the fans come from is fine with me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm a fan of superhero comics, and I like this stuff. So I do think there will be some people who are fans of mainstream comics who would be interested in this, but that's not where the core audience is going to be.
Right.
No, we talked about this a few times, remember? It's going to be big in Europe. It's going to be big in France, Italy, Spain, maybe Germany. You know, they're not so heavy on superheroes over there.
Yeah, I know they like
they got like detective stories, pirate stories, you name it. You know, it's not like here where everything's going to be. You know, it's not a comic book unless there's a guy with big muscles,
right,
and a costume on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I know there's Tintin and Lucky Luke and Asterix, and you know they even like the Disney ducks far greater than we do in this country, and it's from the United States. It's kind of interesting that way.
Yeah. So that's
well, they picked up on jazz. They picked up on jazz before we did.
What's that?
They picked up on jazz before we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jerry Lewis, of course.
What about Woody Allen? He's pretty big in France.
I'm not sure about that one, but you know, let's see, what else was I going to ask you about? What it kind of reminds me of how you're describing it. I don't know, did you ever read the original novel of Roger Rabbit before they made it into the feature film? It was kind of like film noirish. I mean, the film itself was kind of too, but you know.
I know of it, and I know it had a slightly different title. Wasn't it Who Murdered Roger Rabbit?
Or Who Censored Roger Rabbit or something like that.
That's it, yeah. I knew it had a slightly different title. No, I haven't read it, but that's I hadn't even thought about the fact that there was that novel. That's something I'm going to put on a list of things I want to read, because this does sound like it might have some relevance.
Right.
I remember that. I remember that.
The novel itself
was different. Yeah, I remember that. We're different. What we're doing is different. I think what we're doing is different than what's ever been done on this type of film noir. Mm-hmm. I can't think of anything that's been done like what we're doing with Danny and Harry.
Yeah.
It was pretty shocking the first time I saw Walter's art for a scene where somebody gets shot, because there was blood, and And previously we've been looking at these funny characters running around, in some cases hitting each other, but then there was gunplay, and there was blood, and there was death, and it's not gory, it's not over the top, but there's blood, and it was extra shocking because it's not overly violent and gory, and because it is cartoony. So it makes anything that is real even more real, like somebody getting shot and dying and either bleeding out or just dying from the gunshot wound itself. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it a little bit different, and that brings home the reality of it in those parts of the story where you realize pretty early on people can die. Like I said, unlike a Warner Brothers cartoon where some bomb blows up in somebody's face and they're back 2 seconds later.
Right. It kind of reminds me of this too. Is like you mentioned Joe Staton, and he's of course drawing Dick Tracy currently, and he's working with Mike Curtis, who also did furry fandom for a long time with his Shanda Fantasy Arts. So I'm kind of aware of that.
Yep.
And I've interviewed both of them on separate occasions and together. I'm planning to interview them again. I don't know when it's going to happen, but for Dick Tracy's, 80th anniversary or something like that? Something like the 90th or something like that. I don't remember the anniversary of Dick Tracy, but it's something like that.
And then Joe Staton's been drawing it now for quite some time.
Yeah.
I think it might be 6 years. Could it possibly be 6 years already?
Sounds about right.
So
yeah.
It's something like that, and he's doing a fantastic job with it, and he loves doing it. It's been his dream. I've read interviews with him where he talks about being on the kitchen floor on Sunday morning with the paper spread out and reading Dick Tracy and grabbing a crayon and trying to copy the drawings.
Yeah. Well, I know
for them it'd be much more comfortable on a table.
But not as good a story.
Yeah. But I know for Mike, this is like a dream come true, because Mike Curtis, even though he started off writing Richie Rich stories for Harvey Comics, his dream was always to write either for Superman or for Dick Tracy, and he got Dick Tracy, so... Yeah.
Speaking of Richie Rich, I've also worked with Peter Cooper,
okay.
And that was one of who's doing Spy vs. Spy,
right.
And that was one of his first jobs in comics, professional jobs, was inking Richie Rich.
That's correct, yeah.
Which he said was so boring that he would watch TV while he was doing it.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with all my books, but one of my books is the Harvey Comics Companion.
No, we're not. Tell us about yourself,
Mark. So one of I'm going to tell us about myself on my own podcast, but I usually do anyway, not on the interviews. But no, Harvey Comics was actually my first love that I did a fanzine for almost 25 years, and finally it culminated in the Harvey Comics Companion, and I interviewed anybody and everybody and found out a lot of people that worked at Harvey, maybe for short stints, that did a lot of other things, and Peter Cooper's one. Another one is like Milton Knight, who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago on this show. And, they all kind of stepped through the doors of Harvey at some point. The most surprising one is, I don't know if you read Mark Evanier's News from Me column. But
I've seen it, but I don't read it on a regular basis, but I have seen it.
Okay. He actually reached out to me, and he says, is there any truth to the fact that Hervé Villachez actually worked for Harvey Comics? And I said, it's absolutely true.
Wow, doing what?
When he grew up, or as tall as he got, he grew up and became an artist and a painter in France, and he came out to the United States. He didn't have any money, and before he got really solid in acting with like The Man with Golden Gun and Fantasy Island, things like that, one of his first gigs was inking pages for Harvey Comics in the early 70s. He never got credit, so you never see this stuff, but he was one of them. So.
How did you uncover that Peter Cooper worked for Harvey? How did you figure that out?
either somebody told me or I read it somewhere. I don't even remember now, but I know he did. He's in the book, so it's like,
wow, that's amazing because I didn't think that was that information was really out there, but apparently it is.
But I didn't know that story that you told just now, that he would ink in front of the TV. That would have been funny to put in the book. I'm
not surprised he didn't tell you somebody on the record.
Yeah. Because, when I first knew about him was, like you said, Spy versus Spy, which he's still doing. I think he's done it longer than the original guy, Antonio Perillas. But, it's like, apparently he likes it, I guess, so he keeps doing it, so.
Yeah, and he did Aesop's Fables with me for Fantagraphics back in the late 80s, early 90s. Ran 3 issues. He did the first cover. He did a story in each issue, and one or two of them was just reprinted in the. Somebody just did a book of classic children's stuff, and you know what? Let me just grab it right here because the readers are going to want to know the graphic. Your listeners, the graphic canon of children's literature, which is a big, thick book, and it's got all children's stories from the public domain primarily.
Okay.
And so his Aesop's Fables that we did together are in there. A lot of people were in that compilation. Rick Geary.
Yeah.
And my approach to that was kind of similar to what we're doing with Danny and Harry, in that that was even wackier. But the stories were such good stories that I figured they could be done in a slightly offbeat style. But I think Danny and Harry is much more. It's actually more serious. It's much more straightforward. The stories we try to plot them as tightly as we can and make sure it all makes sense. And Walter is very, very good at kind of being we supervise each other. I kind of oversee the art, and he oversees the story, but he draws the art, and I write the story.
Mm-hmm.
So it all works out very, very well, and the fact that we disagree on certain things at certain times, it's only for a little while. Sometimes I will convince him of doing something a certain way. Sometimes he'll convince me. Mm-hmm. And I definitely have had to compromise. I don't know if he feels he's had to compromise at all, but I definitely feel like I've had to compromise at times. But ultimately, I don't regret it because I don't think you see the work, so to speak. You don't see the struggle that went into figuring out how we were going to do something. You just see what I hope is a well-constructed story.
Mm-hmm.
To get back to Harvey Commons, what was the page rate? Does anyone know?
I wrote
Couldn't have been much.
I wrote about it in the book, and I think at the end it got up to like $35 a page. But that was
I was going to say 40, but yeah.
And I think
35 is probably right.
Pencil and ink?
That I'm not sure. I mean, I do know people like Warren Kremer got paid a lot more, but that was because he was like the guy and did most of the covers and things like that.
I don't know that guy. What was his name?
Warren Kremer. You're asking me about my books. That's one of my next books. Is a book about Warren Kremer, because he's like one of my favorite artists and nobody knows who he is. It's like.
No, I don't. I never heard of his name.
Yeah.
No, I know his stuff.
He's the equivalent of, say, a Dan DiCarlo at Archie or Carl Barks at Disney. He's like, or Kirby or Ditko at Marvel. It's like somebody like that, except nobody knows who he is.
Well, no, I knew who Steve Ditko. He was my favorite.
Yeah, but I'm talking about Harvey. I mean, it's like, yeah. So I mean, his closest peer who is still around is Ernie Colon, but Ernie's done a lot of different stuff, not just Harvey. So.
No, I used to buy. Actually, to tell you the truth, I used to buy the Harvey comics, and I liked them a lot. I used to read them probably more than I read Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading the Harvey comics this would have been 65, 66, and since you know a lot about Harvey, maybe you can answer this question. Why did Sad Sack always have a different artist on the cover than the artist that did the interiors? I could never, and I never liked the cover artist. I liked the interiors.
That's funny.
And I would kind of hold my nose and buy each issue and open it up as fast as I could to get past those covers.
It's funny that you say that because the cover artist is George Baker, and he was the one who created the character.
Well, I certainly did not know that as a kid.
Now, how it started is...
Don't ask that question again. Hey, what about Gold Key? You remember Gold Key comics?
Oh, yeah.
I used to buy them a lot, too. I like them a lot.
Yeah, Gold Key, a lot of their artists, besides, we said Carl Barks for Disney, but for, like, the Hanna-Barbera titles and others, they had a lot of the Hanna-Barbera regulars that were animators and storyboard artists there that did a lot of the comic books and things like that. So.
Yeah.
And
figures, because the art was really good in the Gold Key comics. I mean, they had Alex Toth. Didn't he do Zorro for
which one?
Gold Key?
Which one?
Alex Toth.
Yeah, I think he did for a brief time. But he also did stuff at Hanna-Barbera as well, and everything else, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, going back to Sad Sack briefly, just to explain. So, Sad Sack originally was a army strip in this magazine called Yank, which was an army weekly, not a porn magazine like it was later, but which is true. Which is true. And he drew these like multi-panel silent gag strips where Sad Sack would be doing something and he'd get in trouble by the end and stuff like that. But when Harvey took it over to, then after World War II, they stopped the strip, and then it became a Sunday strip in the newspapers. And again, it was a silent strip. It was like about 10 panels or something like that. And then Harvey in 1949 made a comic book, and originally they're just reprinting the Sunday strips. And of course, since they're printing them so fast, they ran out of them, so they had to do some new strips. Well, George Baker wasn't good at doing like a longer story with dialogue and things like that. So they brought in other artists to ghost him to fill out the story and make them longer, like 5 pages or 10 pages or whatever. And it eventually got to the point where he says, well, if these other guys are doing that, let them do it. I'll just do the covers. But slowly over time, like from the 50s to the 70s when he died, his artwork kind of really morphed and got excessively atrocious. So,
yeah.
And it's the same guy, and it's like, I don't know if he had some sort of, issues with drawing or anything like that, or if he just was dashing it off quickly, which is how it got more and more sloppy. That part I don't know, because he died in 1975. So, but, yeah, that's the basic story. And then other artists carried on and did the strips for the comic books.
Maybe he got just bored with it. He got burnt out.
Yeah. But he drew so many covers that there's still covers to this day that have never been published because... and the people I know that worked at Harvey, like I interviewed Paul Marangeli, and he said, just pull out a cover out of the files there, and there'd be files were filled with just covers that the guy drew, and that would be on the next issue.
I was very happy that he was not doing the interiors.
Yeah, if he did, it was way back at the beginning, like I said. By the time you're talking about in the 60s, like there's a good artist that did it that I liked. He's kind of a fun, kind of cartoony artist named Fred Rhodes. He did a lot of them, and There's another guy named Jack O'Brien that did quite a few strips for.
I'm looking at some images right now of sad sack George Baker covers from what must be the, late 40s, early 50s, and then what it looked like in the 60s. And I still do, I'm not enamored of what it looked like originally, but it looked a lot better than it ended up looking in the mid 60s. That's for sure.
Well, Walter can answer this one. I'm going to ask Walter this because it was a question I was going to ask anyway. But you have this tendency to draw totally different depending on what it is. Like, I've seen some of your storyboard art. It doesn't look like anything you did for Crazy or Cracked. And, and it's like, and even this stuff we're talking now, it looks different again, with the film noir, funny animal look and everything like that. So you can change your style. How do you do that? Is that easy for you, or do you just do it?
Yeah, it's very easy. It's very easy. I don't know how I do it. It's like maybe I have multiple personalities.
Well, there a lot of the better artists have that ability. I know that.
I'm sorry, Charles. You know who can do that? I'll give you two names that can do that. Neil Adams can do that, and Frank Frazetta did it very well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
Frank Frazetta did it fantastic. Oh man, Frank Frazetta.
Joe Staten, the more cartoony Joe Staten gets to draw, the better he likes it.
Yeah, and that's true. I've seen. Scooby-Doo is quite a bit different than Dick Tracy and other stuff, E-Man and stuff like that. So yeah, I get what you mean. But I'm an artist to a point. I think I draw pretty well, but having me draw more realistic. Very time-consuming, very difficult for me. But cartoony, I can do that all day long.
Now, do you know who Fred Hembeck is?
Yeah.
He started out wanting to imitate, believe it or not, Neil Adams. And I've never seen that material, but at some point he just decided to become a cartoonist, and he's been pretty successful at that.
Right.
But I'm working with, on various projects, I've been working with a Filipino artist named Jim Jimenez, and I worked with him for 5 years before I saw his really cartoony stuff.
Yeah.
And because he draws in a very realistic comic book style. His cartoony stuff is absolutely charming and brilliant and amazing, and I don't know if he can draw, I assume he can do it in comics, I just saw single illustrations, but most really, really good artists can do that.
Yeah.
And when you see a really simple little cartoon, if that's all you see, or initially what you see of an artist, you think, well, I can do that. Anybody can do that. Well, it takes an awful lot of skill to be able to draw that simply.
Yeah. Well, that's what I discovered when I did the Warren Kremer book. Go ahead.
The better draftsman you are, the better your cartoons are going to look.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like take Mort Drucker, for instance. That guy is a superb draftsman. And he can draw. I saw some of his work where he was kind of realistic. Mm-hmm. And I also saw Jack Davis, who was another really good draftsman, where he could draw, do the cartoon stuff. He could do that mad comic book look, and he also used to do realistic stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Mort Drucker's realistic stuff. I've seen the war comics, and it's even more realistic than Jack Davis's straight stuff. And Mort Drucker's cartoons are obviously very different from his straight stuff. But another example of a versatile artist.
Yeah. Well, like I was mentioning,
you know what it is. You know what it is. I call it a paycheck. You're going to give me how much money to do something realistic? Oh, you got it. You want cartoony? How much money is that again? No problem.
Well, I'm just always amazed by that because, see, for me, it's like you could say, here's some more money to make it more realistic, and it would be a struggle for me, and it just always bugged me that I couldn't draw as realistic as,
Well, you know what? You shouldn't do that.
What? Draw realistic or take money?
Yes, if it's a struggle, that means it's stressing you out. That can affect your whole sex life.
Oh.
if you have a sex life.
I'm not going to discuss that here.
Now, wasn't there a little sad sack?
There's my sex life right there.
That's my sex life.
Oh, hey, we have something in common, Walter.
I say to people, how's your sex life? When they say it, I say, what's that?
Wasn't there a little sad sack?
There was a little sad sack. It was. It only ran for a couple years. It only ran for a couple years in the '60s, and yeah.
Was he in the army?
No. No.
He was in the Oh, you got that guy mixed up. There was a big sack. He was in the Navy.
Big sack. He just had a big sack. That's all. Anyway.
And I see here that Sandsack also had a talking dog.
Yes, Mutzi.
I didn't know about that either.
Yeah.
What kind of personality did that dog have?
Happy. He was happy.
I mean, he's kind of lazy type dog. That's about it. But they didn't really put him in the regular comics. So if you were reading the regular Sad Sack, it wasn't in there. It's like, I don't know if you ever got the Harvey Hits title, where it was kind of like a DC showcase or something like that, where they just had tryout issues. Somewhere along the line.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at that now. I'm looking at Harvey Hits number 108.
Yeah, so they had later on they got in a rut and they just did some Mutzi issues and they did some Gabby Gob. There's your Navy one, and Little Sad Sack.
Didn't I say he was in the Navy? That's what I was talking about.
And but in the early ones, they had some interesting tryout issues. That's how Richie Rich, his first, even though he's in the back of Little Dot, his first solo title was Harvey Hits issue. And,
the dog was in the army.
Yeah, the dog was in the army too.
Yeah. But not Little Sad Sack.
No, Little Sad Sack. I don't know how that's related, because I've read him before, and it's kind of like Sad Sack as a little boy. Which is, I guess, a takeoff on Little Archie, but it didn't really make any sort of logical sense. I mean, why did they do this? But hey, they did a lot of weird things at Harvey. They had a Cow Sills comic, right. And they had.
But there was no suspense in Little Sad Sack. You knew he wasn't going to get killed because he grows up to be Sad Sack, just like you knew Superboy wasn't going to be killed because he was going to grow up to be Superman.
Right. But, I think the whole point of Little Sad Sack was kind of making him like Charlie Brown or something like that, just a perpetual loser. But it didn't quite come off. It's kind of a strange comic book title. Yeah. But,
I mean, even stranger than Sad Sack.
Yes. Well, yeah, Sad Sack itself is kind of a strange comic. But, there's always kind of like, all along in all forms of entertainment, there's always like the military guy of some sort that's looked down upon, or something.
Well, did Beetle Bailey come after Sad Sack?
It did, but it's the same type of idea. And then there's a lot of TV shows like that if it isn't the lead character, there's somebody in the character looked down upon. Like Bilko, it's Doberman or something.
Right.
Gomer Pyle or, whatever, all those different shows. So, it's just the weird thing how military works on.
Mark,
yes.
Mark, how do you like living in Oregon?
I live in Oregon, not Oregon, but hey.
Oregon. Okay, yeah. Oregon. You lived in L.A., didn't you live in California?
I lived in California. I didn't live in L.A. except when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually going back there tomorrow or today, depending on my mood. Which is one reason I had so many meetings this morning. It's like, I don't know if you guys, if you're like so good on freelancing, you don't have to do other jobs or anything. I always have to maintain a regular 9-to-5 job because the books don't pay the bills. It's like, on a consistent basis. So, I lost my job about a week ago, and then I scrambled around and looked for work this week, and I said, I don't usually get a job that quickly. I'm going to go take a couple weeks off and go to California and visit my dad and go to Southern California and go to some events I put off and everything. And
go to Disneyland.
yeah, well, the thing is, I can't do everything now because I already got a new job lined up, and that's what I was doing this morning. It's like, that's why I said I got a couple meetings, and it's like, so.
I'm only asking because I'm in the process of selling my house.
Yeah.
And I'm down here in Florida, and I don't know, it's not that great, really. It's hot as hell.
Well, you won't get that in Oregon, except maybe in August, if you're considering moving up here.
Where you on, Oregon?
Yeah. There's a couple other cartoonists up here. Mike Allred's up here. He lives in the same town. So, I'm in.
I don't know him.
Yeah, he does Madman, and currently he's done a version of the Silver Surfer title. And
he's done a bunch of stuff for Marvel.
Yeah, he has a very distinct style. If you see it, you'd go, "Oh, I get it." He works with his wife, and they both live here. And I don't live in Eugene anymore. I live next door in Springfield, which is where the Simpsons live. But and yeah, I do.
I'm just wondering. Wondering.
Yeah.
I might wind up in Europe. Not really.
I know. Everybody talks about that, not to get too political. It's like so many people I talk to is like, I think I'll move to Europe. It's like, okay. It's like,
Little towns and villages that are pretty nice,
Yeah.
Everything's home. Yeah. Food is all homemade.
I mean, I do have friends that moved to Europe, but they moved a long time ago. It's like they bailed out. I'm in my 50s now, and they bailed out when they were in their 20s. They're like, we're tired of this. And to me, in my 20s, I couldn't even think of living in another country. It didn't even cross my mind. It's like, nowadays I could possibly.
Walter, you need to move to Paris so you can hawk Danny and Harry.
That's right. He said it's going to be popular over there. So.
I was thinking more of Italy. The little towns, not the big cities, little towns and the little villages.
It can be like Picasso. Did you ever see that skit on Saturday Night Live way back in the 80s with John Lovitz, and he plays Picasso? It's on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
And he just signs a napkin and he says, "Here, go sell this. I'm Picasso." That's what you could do. I'm Walter Brogan. But everybody's going to go, who?
Wally B.
Remember me from Cracked? Uh-oh.
I'm big in America.
Remember me? Remember me? I was the supermodel of Cracked magazine.
I'll probably stay down here.
How did those photo shoots go? I asked you about those before, I think. There's one where you're like a cop on the roof or something, and they do.
I've seen that. I've seen that picture.
Yeah, they had Walter doing all sorts of weird crap.
That was Andy Simmons.
Yeah.
Lou Silver song. I was supposed to make funny faces.
Uh-huh.
And, I was making all these, they were like 6 or 7 more photographs where I made these goofy looking faces.
But why did they pick you? Just for that? Because it's like, how would they know what you look like? I guess you did meet up with them at some point, but,
Oh, it was funny. I made really crazy, goofy looking faces. It was fun.
Yeah.
And people were laughing like that. And then people, I don't know, like, would you have done that? You probably wouldn't do that, right? Or Charles, you wouldn't have done that, right? Make these, funny, goofy faces, and it's going to be published, and a lot of people are going to see it. You probably wouldn't.
I might have. I'm not ruling it out. It's not something I aspire to, but
Well, I did.
That's my career choice, making funny faces.
How about you, Mark? Would you have done something like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I looked at the old issues of Mad, and it always floored me when I found out it was Al Feldstein. Feldstein would make the weirdest faces, like he'd sneer or something, and he'd have a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. And I said, this is the editor of Mad. He's supposed to be a serious guy, and he's doing these goofy faces. And I liked it that he did it, and, and Gaines, too. Gaines would act goofy, too, and it's like...
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I would like nothing more than to have you two guys make a series of funny faces and send them to me. I'd like to take a look at them.
Uh-oh. And then what?
I can tell you that's not going to happen.
and then Walter has 12 new fake Facebook accounts.
Hey.
And blackmail material.
Yes, exactly.
What kind of face are you going to make? I just funny face. Lou used to do that. Lou Silverstone, he used to do that.
Yeah, he did a few of those. And actually,
that sounds like something a model would actually get paid to do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pay you. I don't want to see your funny face that much.
Well, but, making funny faces is good. Like I finally acquired the program that was sold at the final Monty Python concerts like 3 or 4 years ago. And inside, when they have current photos of all the Python guys, they're making the goofiest faces because they figure we're old, we don't need to look proper anymore, and so they're just like sticking their tongues out and poking their eyes out and everything else.
I saw them at City Center.
I used to do that when I would come home from work. I used to do it on the subway and on the ferry boat just to get people's reaction.
Oh, I thought just to get your own seat.
Huh?
I thought you just did just to get your own seat on the subway.
No, I used to do that. And sometimes when I was with my first wife or my second wife, I would just start making these funny faces, and it would embarrass them to like no end.
Wow.
To the point where they would say, "Don't do that. You're embarrassing me," and I would make even more funny faces.
Charles, you mentioned City Center. So what was that like?
I saw Monty Python, I think it was 1979 at City Center.
Actually,
they were at that.
It was 76. It was actually.
Really? It was 76?
Yeah.
Wow. They were at the height of their.
You saw me, Charles?
No, I saw Monty Python at City Center in New York, and they were at the height of their powers at that time.
Yeah.
And it was. It was pretty amazing. At one point, they did one of their routines and then extended it. And I think it was the guy at the travel office who was just going on and on and on about how much he hates the package tours.
Yeah.
And I think it was Michael Palin. And he would exit out the back of the stage and pop up in the audience. And just keep doing it.
I've seen the film of it, It
was... It was pretty amazing, but they said they had to stop performing live because everybody in the audience knew every word of every routine.
Yeah, I believe it.
and they would be reciting it as they were performing.
Yeah. I'm just totally jealous. That's why I had to bring it up again since you mentioned it briefly, because it's like they appeared at Hollywood Bowl in 1980, and I was like 13 at that time, but I loved Monty Python, and I was I wish I could see him, but I can't do it because I was in Northern California and they're in Southern California, and and then it turned out, I found out a few years later, my uncle went to it, and his wife and daughters, and I was like, you didn't invite me? It was, we didn't think about it, and I was so jealous. And also, it just didn't seem like something they would have gone to it, so it never crossed my mind, are you going to this? Because they seemed a little more traditional than the way I think, to put it
maybe I'll make it even worse for you. I saw Andy Kaufman at Carnegie Hall.
Wow. And then I have friends that are older that have seen the Beatles, and it's like,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And they always say the same thing. They go, "Well, I saw the Beatles. I couldn't hear the Beatles. I saw them." And I said, "Yeah, but you went." It's like.
I was friends with a copywriter back in 1978.
Yeah.
Who was friends with Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
And he used to come up and see him, and the three of us would sit in his office.
Wow.
Yeah, a guy named Mike Shapiro. He was friends with him.
Not sure if I know who that is. I'm trying to think. Anyway.
You wouldn't know Mike Shapiro.
I wouldn't? Oh, okay.
No. Okay. He was a copywriter I worked with.
Okay. He sounds familiar, like he would be somebody.
Now, you know what I did not see that I wished I had been to, and a cousin of mine went. I don't know where I was. He saw the Carl Stalling Project.
Oh wow, yeah, I didn't see that either.
Saw the Carl Stalling Orchestra play live to Warner Brothers cartoons. I think that was at Carnegie Hall as well.
Yeah. All right, let me think of something that might make you jealous. I don't know. It's like I met a lot of celebrities over the years, but it's like just certain concerts I just never saw. I mean, I did see like George Carlin or somebody like that, but it seems like everybody's seen him. Yeah.
I met Dustin Hoffman.
Wow.
One-on-one, alone. Now, the circumstances were truly bizarre. There's a piece, I think is it Benjamin Britten's Young People's Guide to the Orchestra? Okay. It has a narration where somebody narrates about the different instruments.
Yeah.
And I took my first year of college at Oneonta, State University of New York at Oneonta, and apparently Dustin Hoffman knew the orchestra, the guy who ran the music program at Oneonta, and agreed to do this spoken part for him. Now, this was 1973. Dustin Hoffman was as big as he's ever been at that time. And at the end of the concert, they said Dustin Hoffman will be backstage in one of the dressing rooms signing autographs. So I thought, well, I'll go try to get the program autograph, but there's going to be a line out the door. I go back there, and these two giggling girls are just coming out of the dressing room. They must have just been in there and gotten his autograph. I walk in there. He's in this dressing room by himself. There's nobody in back of me. There's nobody in front of me. It's just him standing there.
So what happened?
I was so nervous.
Nobody was around. It was getting good.
I was so nervous that I was calm. Okay. And I said to him, I was calm because I was so nervous.
Oh, I think you said something else.
Me too, but I was keeping quiet.
And I actually thought of something intelligent. I thought of something intelligent to say. I said that I read that the next movie you're going to make is based on the detective stories about the rabbi. Saturday the rabbi did this, Sunday the rabbi did this. It was a series of mysteries that was popular around that time, and I think there was 7 of them, one for each day of the week. And I had read that they had the rights, they were going to make this movie. And he said, oh no, we decided we're not going to do that. We're going to do Lenny Bruce.
Oh, wow.
And I said, oh, that'll be interesting. And he signed my program, and that was the end of it. And I walked out, and I thought, well, I just had an intelligent one-on-one conversation with Dustin Hoffman in a dressing room at the State University College at Oneonta. And I thought, what are the chances of something like that happening? And got some inside information on this next movie.
Wow.
Did you get the autograph?
I still have it.
Huh.
Oh, okay. Good.
The only Dustin Hoffman story I have, I've never met him, but I always like the story. Do you know the story about him meeting Paul McCartney during the recording of Band on the Run?
No.
Apparently they met up. I forgot where they were, probably in Europe or somewhere else. But Dustin was asking Paul, how do you write a song? I mean, and he says, well, ideas come to me different ways or whatever. And he says, well, like, here's a newspaper article. Pablo Picasso, I'm talking about Picasso again. Pablo Picasso just died. Could you write a song about that? And he says, I think I could. And then he just pulled out the guitar and just started playing. Like, he found out the final words that Picasso supposedly said were, drink to me, drink to my health. You know I can't drink anymore. That was supposedly the last thing he ever said before he died. And Paul just starts singing, drink to me, drink to my health, just right in front of Dustin, immediately. And it's on the record, and it's like, and if you get like the expanded version or something, there's interviews with the different celebrities, and Dustin's on there, and he says that story, and it's like, wow, he just was floored that he could just come up with a song like that, That
would have been right. That would have been right around the same time. Because Band on the Run was what year?
73, the end.
Yeah, so that was right. That was the same year.
Yeah. And Picasso died in
I thought it was 74.
Well, it was a big hit in '74, but I mean, it came at the tail end, like December or something, like right for Christmas or something. But it was a hit for like 2 or 3 years after that, you know.
Yeah.
But,
I remember that, sure. Yeah.
But okay, my big claim to fame, but you both may have met him, is Stan Lee. But my story's kind of interesting. Is this is back probably like early '90s in San Diego. And do you know how Stan Lee does things now, right? He has like $200 autographs, and there's lines out the door, and you just see him for 3 seconds, and he scribbles his name, and then you're gone. You know, that's how it is now.
I used to see him all the time at the Marvel headquarters.
Well, you work for the man, so I mean, for me as a
I used to pop in his office once in a while and say, "How you doing, Stan?" He said, you go, I said, no. You go, Stan. I said, yeah, Stan, that's it.
Mm-hmm. But me as a lowly fanboy in the early '90s is like I was in San Diego, and there was like some drapes or something, and I looked behind the drapes, and it was just like you with Dustin Hoffman, that there was no one around. It was just him, and he had a little briefcase. And so I went up and just started chit-chatting about him to him and stuff like that, and I told him I was doing a fanzine about Harvey Comics, and he says, "Wow, that's really interesting," and everything like that. We were talking for about 20, 30 minutes, and then finally some handler says, "Oh, Mr. Lee, you need to come to this event." "Oh, sorry, gotta go, but keep it up. Good luck to you, and I hope you have some success," or something to those type of words. And I was like floored. I was like, wow,
Mark, he says that to everybody.
I know he does, but when I saw him and that I was by myself with him was more significant. Like, you could probably meet Dustin Hoffman now if he wrote a book and was at the bookstore signing, but you'd be like the Stan Lee now. 3 seconds and you're gone. You wouldn't have to be able to talk to him, So
I think he'll still remember me.
He'd probably run.
I don't think he remembers much these days.
He has that restraining order. He has the one for you and Sheldon.
Wow.
So, I don't know, we really detoured. Is there any final comments or anything else you want to say?
Let's talk about Danny and Harry.
All right.
Who?
Danny and Harry.
So, what is the easiest way to pick up Danny and Harry? Online, or can you find it in stores?
It's Comixology. Just go to Comixology. Danny and Harry. Private detectives. You throw my last name in there, Santino or Brogan as a last name. It'll come up pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. First issue is $1.99 for the PDF. The second issue comes out the beginning of November, and we're going to come out the beginning of each month. And then when the 6 issues are done, it's going to be collected as an ebook and a print book.
Okay.
And hopefully the next story sequence will start right after that. We're going to try to do it monthly and collect it every 6 months. That is the plan. And Walter's very fast. I'm pretty fast when I actually sit down and get to it. So we'll see how it goes. We might have bitten off a bit of an ambitious schedule, but the first sequence, the 140 pages, they're all done. They just have to be some of them have to be lettered, but that's pretty quick. Yeah. But Comixology is the way to go. Every 6 months it'll be on Amazon as well as a print book.
Very good.
Okay. And we're going to be shopping it around for some animation studios.
Cool.
Yes, indeed.
I found a few in Europe, in France, and I want to get in touch with them once I get settled down. Right now, I'm in the middle of moving.
Yeah.
The house is being sold. I got to go to closing, hopefully sometime in November, and then I can buckle down and get to work on this.
Very good.
Right now, it's like between the realtor, between my ex, between the lawyer. At this point, I'm calling them, all right, I know, this is the idiot, right? They call me idiot.
Well, hopefully by the time you get back to the drawing board, you'll have something to draw, because I'm still feverishly trying to figure out the plot for the second story. The second story is going to be called the drugstore on 12th Street.
Mm-hmm.
That was Walter's title, and that's all he gave me initially. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good title. Let me come up with something that we can hang that title on.
Sounds good. Okay. Any other projects to plug besides that, or is this taking up your whole time here?
Not together. I'm doing 2, soon to be 3 different web comics at the Edgar Rice Burroughs website. They have a subscription service for adapting pretty much everything that Edgar Rice Burroughs has ever written.
Oh, wow.
And by the time I got there, all the good stuff was taken. I didn't know he had written basically melodramas. I'm doing 2 different melodramas, one called The Girl from Hollywood, another one called The Girl from Farris's, which was a whorehouse in Chicago, and then Inspector Muldoon, which are locked room puzzle story murder mysteries, which even after you read the solution, you won't be able to figure out. And I'm working on some other stuff as well. I don't think Walter's doing any other comic book work right now. Are you, Walter?
No, not right now. I'm just right now. It's just Danny and Harry, and occasionally I'll get a storyboard job come in.
Mm-hmm. You know, okay, so you're still doing some storyboarding on occasion. Okay. All right.
Yeah, the storyboards are okay, and that's it.
And I've been, Mark, I've been listening to your podcasts. I find them very entertaining. I don't listen to that many podcasts. I will watch some people do little reviews of things on YouTube, but I listen to your podcast and the Gilbert Gottfried podcast.
I do too, actually, the Gilbert Gottfried.
And Mark, is it Evanier? Is that the way it's pronounced?
Yes.
Yeah, he was on the Gilbert Gottfried. It was pretty interesting.
Yes. The thing I like about Gilbert Gottfried is sometimes, well, I guess like mine, is he'll have somebody that I don't even know, and once I listen to it, I go, oh, I know that guy, or I know about what he's done, it's things like that.
Yeah, I've watched 10 movies he was involved in and had no idea he was involved in.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
The last guy you interviewed, Dan, I forget his last name.
Oh, Fiorella? Yeah.
Yeah, he comes from Staten Island, right?
I believe so. Yeah. He's also.
Yeah, that's where I come from, Staten Island, but I don't remember that guy.
He's also a writer.
I don't even remember him when he worked for Crack Magazine.
Well, he worked. I think we said last time 1997 to 2004. Like at the tail end.
Yeah, I was there in 97.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. You said you were there when Culpa was there. I always forget when everybody ends. I know when they start, but there's no big ceremony when somebody left Cracked. It was just like it just stops. It's like,
Well, yeah, but it's strange that I don't remember him.
Yeah.
Being that we're both from Staten Island, also John Ficarra is from Staten Island.
Oh, that's funny. And he worked for Crack briefly too, but he worked there back before he did Mad and everything. So.
Yeah, well, there was a story Lou told me about that, but I'm not saying nothing. Lou Silverstone told me something. But anyway, so well, I'm going to go get lunch. You guys want to carry on? I'm kind of hungry.
Is the baby crying? What's going on over there?
No.
There's no hippo farts? No, nothing? What's going on over there?
It's probably got gas.
Your listeners must be wondering, how do these two guys ever produce anything?
All right.
I'm wondering the same thing myself.
You probably work in separate residences, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, we've never met. We actually are the same age. We grew up pretty much in the same geographical area. I grew up on Long Island. He on Staten Island. We've never met.
Yeah.
We've talked on the phone and email, and that's about it. But it seems to work. Having pretty much the same background, having watched the same monster movies and cartoons growing up, and frequenting the same kind of newsstands growing up.
Yeah.
We basically have the same background. One thing that he does not share with me is my love of Japanese monster movies, though.
I like them to a point. My Japanese monster movies, it has to be a guy in a rubber suit. That's my quality.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's the only way to go.
Because whenever there's a new Godzilla, they go, Mark, did you see the new Godzilla? No, because it's not a guy in a rubber suit.
I agree. Yep, yeah.
Well, I like Japanese girls, so.
Oh, one last question. Is there a chance once the books start coming out, appearing at conventions together or anything like that?
That will happen. We'd like to get some merchandise together. We talked about plush toys, which are always fun, and posters and cards and other stuff. Yeah, that'll definitely happen.
Original artwork, Charles. Yeah. Original artwork. I'll bring some of that in.
I suspect it'll probably end up being at an Anthropon or something like that, because those shows are manageable. They get maybe 5,000 people at Anthropon, and the table is pretty reasonable.
Right.
But I think right now, if we were to try to do one of the big comic book conventions, it might be a little bit of a waste of time.
You get lost in the shuffling. Yeah.
They're so big. I just came from the New York convention. There were 250,000 people there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you could come and see us. We always love you to come and see us. We even let you buy a lunch.
Yeah. Well, I've been to the East Coast quite a few times, both Florida and New York, just not in a while. It's been about 10 years now, but if you ever get a chance to come out to the West Coast, let me know if you're doing a show out here, or even if you're doing a show back there. I could probably make my way out there at some point. So,
Yeah, it'll happen. It'll happen at some point when it's economically feasible. It makes some sense. We'll probably have to sell, a little bit more than It was funny. Walter said to me the other day, "Can let's ask Marcosia how many copies we've sold?" I said, "I don't think we want to do that." I just don't see that that's going to brighten our day at this point.
How many fingers do I have?
I know one of my daughters bought one, so there's one.
Yay, there we go. All right, well, I wish you the best of success on these projects. And
thank you for spending some time with us.
Okay, and,
thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, and we could do it again sometime, but,
Been nice talking to you again.
Okay, always enjoy talking to you, too.
All right,
have a good day.
Take care.
Talk to you later.
Take care, guys.
Bye. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Walter Brogan and Charles Santino, for being my special guests. Episode number 10 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help. This has been the Fun Ideas Podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2018 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much, and have a good night.